Picture a winter night in 1943. The city is dark, not the comfortable dark of a switched-off lamp, but the absolute, enforced darkness of a blackout. Outside, the distant rumble of aircraft makes the walls tremble. Below street level, in a damp stone cellar that smells of earth and fear and boiled cabbage, a mother cups her hands around a small, flickering flame. It's not much. A tin can, some rendered fat, a wick torn from an old shirt. But in that moment it is everything. It is warmth. It is proof that the world hasn't ended yet. It is a vigil light for a husband or son who may or may not be coming home. This is the story of that flame. Across occupied Europe, from the cellars of Warsaw to the bombed-out row houses of London's East End, ordinary people discovered the same hard truth. Manufactured candles ran out, but ingenuity didn't. The improvised survival candle of the Second World War was born from scarcity and stubbornness in equal measure. Families would save every scrap of tallow, every stub of spent wax, every spoonful of cooking fat that could be spared. These were melted together, carefully over a low heat, because fat fires were a real and deadly danger in a blacked-out home, and poured into whatever vessel was available. Tin cans were ideal. Small clay pots worked. Even hollowed turnips served in the most desperate circumstances. The wick was equally improvised. Tightly twisted cotton rags, strips of old shoelaces or braided twine were treated with a thin coat of the same melted fat before being set and allowed to harden. The result burned slower and cleaner than an untreated wick, a piece of Fieldcraft knowledge passed quietly between neighbours and scrawled in the margins of household diaries that historians would later largely overlook. The candle that emerged from this process wasn't beautiful. It was often uneven, smoky, and faintly rancid smelling, but it could burn for hours, sometimes through an entire night of waiting. To understand why these candles mattered so deeply, you have to understand the particular emotional geography of the home front. Millions of families across Europe and beyond were living in a state of suspended grief, not quite mourning, not quite hoping, but holding both feelings simultaneously, night after night. Letters from the front arrived irregularly or not at all. Telegrams brought the news no one wanted, and in the absence of information, the candle in the window became a physical act of faith. The practice of placing a light in the window for an absent loved one is far older than the Second World War, rooted in maritime and rural traditions stretching back centuries. But the war gave it new and urgent meaning. In Britain, despite blackout regulations that made any visible light from a window technically illegal and genuinely dangerous, families found ways, a candle set back from the glass, a tiny flame behind heavy curtains left barely parted, to keep the vigil alive. It was a quiet act of defiance and devotion at the same time. Fat, flame, and Fieldcraft. What makes this story particularly relevant to the Fieldcraft Chronicles audience is how much practical survival knowledge is embedded in it. Rendering fat correctly, separating the pure tallow from the connective tissue and water, is a bushcraft skill with applications far beyond candle making, done properly. Rendered animal fat resists rancidity, burns cleanly, and can serve as a waterproofing agent, a skin protectant, and an emergency fuel source. The women and elderly men doing this work in wartime kitchens were practicing primitive processing techniques that pre-industrial societies had relied on for millennia. The tin can lamp, meanwhile, is one of the most field-deployable light sources available without modern materials, A small hole punched near the base allows airflow. A slightly larger opening at the top manages the draft. The can itself acts as a windbreak and heat concentrator, making the flame more efficient and dramatically harder to extinguish in a breeze. Soldiers in the field had known this for decades. The same basic design appeared in the American Civil War, in the Boer War, and in the trenches of the First World War, before it was carried home and adapted for the civilian front. What the flame remembers. These candles were consumed by the very conditions they helped people endure. They left no museums, no artifacts, no formal historical record. They burned down to nothing and took their stories with them, surviving only in the handwritten diaries of ordinary people, in the memories of children who are now very old, and in the quiet persistence of techniques that preppers and bushcrafters have quietly kept alive without always knowing where they came from. That continuity matters. Every time you render tallow in the field, every time you build a tin can lamp on a camping trip, or pack a fatwood kit for a winter emergency, you are participating in an unbroken chain of human ingenuity that runs directly through those cellar vigils. The people who kept those flames burning weren't survivalists by choice. They were parents, children, neighbors, ordinary people made extraordinary by circumstance, armed with nothing but resourcefulness and the refusal to sit in the dark. That is exactly the spirit that Fieldcraft Chronicles exists to honor and to teach. If this episode lit something up for you, subscribe to Fieldcraft Chronicles and share this video with someone who values history, self-reliance, and the craft of survival. Every share keeps this kind of knowledge alive, which is, when you think about it, exactly what those candles were trying to do.